All right. Well, I do have the chat box up to be able to reference if you type anything in. My name is Carrie Pocat, and I am facilitating our small group today, and it really and truly is intended to be an opportunity for us to just talk to one another, collaborate, specifically knowing that each of you comes from maybe a smaller district or supports smaller districts. So I would love if people want to either unmute and say hello, or maybe turn your camera on for just a second and wave so we can see one another before we jump into the conversation. Thank you, Becky. Oh, look, there we all are. You're welcome to turn your cameras off again if you need to, but it's just nice to see faces, especially if this is going to be more of a roundtable collaborative conversation. So certainly if you need to keep your camera off, do so. If you're able to keep it on, it just helps, I think, keep the conversation moving too. So as I mentioned, my name is Carrie Pocat. I am the Data and Continuous Improvement Consultant at Montcalm Area ISD. So our ISD has 7 local districts. Some of them are quite small. None of them are very large. I think our largest district has, I want to say, around 3,000 students, but there's only one that's that large, and most of them are much, much smaller than that. So I'm wondering if you all want to take a minute to introduce yourselves. Given that some people's cameras are off, if you want to throw your information in the chat, feel free to do so. If you want to unmute and just introduce yourself, maybe say what district or ISD you're from, give a little information about your role, that'd be awesome.
I can go ahead and go first. My name is Pat McCurr. I'm from Union City Community Schools, about 20 miles south of Battle Creek. I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. I just started here in January. We're pretty much ground zero for my KIP at this point. So I'm just trying to take in as much as I can, especially these other small districts. We're only about 1,000 kids in our district, so I'm just trying to take in some information.
Wonderful. Thanks, Patrick.
My name is Mindy Bohan, and I am also the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment for Marcellus Community Schools, and we are about 30 minutes south and west of Kalamazoo, and we are a very tiny district. K-12, we have about 700 students.
That is pretty small. Thank you for introducing yourself, Mindy. I see Corrine added to the chat box. Corrine, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to, or I can just read it.
Good morning, everyone. Yep, Corrine Harden, Brown City Schools. I'm part of the school improvement team for a few years. And then our Title I director and my KIP guru is retiring at the end of the year. So we're kind of dividing some of those roles up amongst the 2 buildings. So I work at the high school. We're a 712 building. And then we have our elementary building too. But yeah, we're a pretty small district here in the thumb.
Nice to meet you.
So I'm Jennifer Lynn. I'm from the Copper Country Intermediate School District. This is my first year in this role, and it includes multiple hats, and one of them is school improvement consultant. And we've started our series for our larger districts, which aren't that large, helping facilitate their process. And then tomorrow I meet specifically with our really tiny schools to get them started, and I'm trying to customize what we're doing with our small schools, customize it for our tiny schools. And when I say tiny, one of the districts, their enrollment is 4 students. And the largest one in our group of 3 tomorrow will have 10 students, and those are K-8 districts in rural isolated communities.
Wow, Jennifer, thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
that's definitely the extreme of small district.
It is. And I was a teacher principal in one of those districts, and then have kind of evolved through varying sizes. And I've been in districts as large as 11,000 students. So I really appreciate that one size does not fit all.
Thank you so much. And I'm just looking, thank you for those of you adding in the chat box. Tracy is here with us. And I don't want to mispronounce the school, but I think it's Marcellus. Is that correct? Marcellus Community Schools. Becky from Heritage Southwest ISD. We have Patty Wood, and she is from Grand Blanc Academy. It's a PK 8th grade with 330 students. So definitely we are in that smaller end. Tim Cameron from the International Academy of Flint. That's a K-12 charter school with about 950 students. Kate Smalley, lead teacher in Flex High North Flint. 2 high schools with about 320 students. We've got more from Marcella. Sarah, nice to meet you. Michelle from West Iron County Public Schools is a K-12 with over 800 students. Hi, Michelle, thanks for waving. James I don't want to say that last name wrong, Middleditch, from Way, Michigan Cyber School. So that's about 200. So it's looking, as we're introducing ourselves, that a lot of our schools are 1,000, or our districts are 1,000 or less. Some maybe might be a little bit larger, and that's definitely for the 6 districts, 6 of our 7 districts in our ISD, that would be about the same size as well. Ooh, North Dickinson County School, K-12, 242. All right, so now that we have some idea, and thank you, you can continue to add in some information about yourself and your district or your schools so that we can make sure we have a good understanding of who's here with us in this roundtable. We'll go ahead and get started. So I'm wondering, I do have some questions that we can throw out as starting points for conversations, but before I give any ideas, I'm wondering if there's anyone who has a topic that they're really wanting to have an opportunity to collaborate with others around, specific to continuous improvement, given the size of our districts and schools that we're representing here today. So I'm working on my wait time. I will just pause. And if you want to unmute, you're welcome to, or if you want to throw a topic in the chat box, we do have a good chunk of time together this morning. So we certainly have time probably to discuss multiple topics.
So one topic that I've come across is how to build that representative team, but also that, especially when you're so small that you have so few maybe professional staff or employees, and then how are you incorporating community and also honoring FERPA issues around that? I know that's a topic that we will need to be discussing, as how do you, again, bring in community, and when you have only 1 full-time employee of the district, or maybe 2, and only like maximum 3 people who have instructional contact with the students, how do you collaborate around student data, which is also under statistical norms? So that would be another one. Statistically, in data groups that are not statistical, what types of data profiles can you build out, and how do you protect confidentiality?
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. So I tried to summarize your question. I'm working on a second one there in the chat box just to anchor us when we get ready to discuss. Did I capture that correctly? Bringing in community and building a representative district team, was that kind of your first big idea?
Yep, that was the first one. Do you want me to write the second one in myself?
That would be awesome.
That off of you. Okay, it'll be about data, non-statistical data sets.
Yep.
Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And then I see, Brad, you also added a topic around looking at tier 1 instruction and how that would connect to federal programs. Also a great question. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we could maybe just start with 1 or 2 of those questions that have been generated, and then as others come to mind or topics come to mind, feel free to throw those in the chat box. So I'd love to start with the one that I just added from Jennifer, given that we know that building that district team is one of the first pieces to engaging in the continuous improvement process. So here's our question on the table. How are we working to bring in community and build a representative district team specifically for our smaller districts where we have fewer staff? What sorts of things are you doing? What are your team makeups? How are you going about that?
I'd be happy to talk about how I do mine. So we have at least one staff member from every type of position in this. We have a full-time staff of only 8 staff members. And then if you include part-time staff, we have about 20. And what we do is I have a couple of our mentors, some of our support staff, some of our administrative staff and instructional staff, at least one person from each of those groups that meet on a regular basis. We meet once to twice a month in regards to our school improvement process. And we try to bring in parents and students as much as possible. Right now, I have about 2 parents that reliably come, but we're always trying to reach out and ask for more parent involvement. And so one of the ways we do that is by using parent surveys and perception surveys. And we send those out quite frequently because not everyone's able to meet at a time that's convenient for them for the school improvement process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James, for sharing. So one of the things that I was just capturing in my notes as I was listening to you was that idea of different ways to engage parent groups, and probably also we could extend that to community. So thinking about that communication and feedback loop, and how do we engage parents if it's difficult to get them physically present and as a part of the conversation and the discussion. So certainly surveys would be one way to engage others outside of the school setting. To get feedback and also gather suggestions. Thank you so much, James. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts for James about what he shared, or want to share their own experiences?
A quick question for James. The surveys that you use, are they surveys that are already created, like from Panorama or some other source, or do you make your own?
I make all of my own surveys. I've gone to, I can't even tell you how many numbers of trainings in the last 2 years around school improvement in my KIP. So I've taken as many documents and stuff like that to help tailor my surveys, but everything I do, I use a mix of Google Forms and SurveyMonkey to send out and create my surveys.
Thank you, James. What about others? How are you building your representative district teams and bringing in the community and stakeholder representation?
I can go ahead and speak. My district was part of the transformation zone. So that really helped build our capacity. So we have a district implementation team that is comprised of our administration, a teacher leader from each of our buildings, and we are small, so we have one at each building, and then we have a special ed representation, and we have a board member on our team. And then we also have building implementation teams that comprise of a department head or a grade level head, along with special ed and a parent representative as well. We do have parent forums to gather information from our parents. We do a culture and climate survey through PBIS every spring to do a planned use study act around different things, and kind of comparing year to year on how our parents' perception is of school safety, of acknowledging students, and of how the maintenance of our buildings are, and how parents, if they feel welcome into our building. So we have a lot of moving pieces.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for your willingness to share. I appreciated another example of ways that you get input from parents. So do you mind giving just a brief explanation of how you use your parent forums?
So we, have a structured agenda with some items that we've gathered from our surveys, and just kind of giving parents the opportunity to extend on some of our inquiries and some of our wonderings about how they would like certain, like one, for instance, is acknowledging students, and how do parents perceive how they would like to see students acknowledged. Can be one of them. One of them could be, students waiting on arrival and dismissal. That's something that seems like a barrier. And talking about how do parents, if it was a perfect world, how do they see, the fluidity and those kind of things. So just getting parents more voice than just behind a screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie, for that additional information. Any questions, follow-up questions for Katie? This is wonderful to hear different ways that we're getting representation. Does anyone else have anything they want to share related to the question about how are we bringing in our community members, our parents, and making sure we have that representative district team? Jennifer, did that give you at least a couple ideas of things that you might be able to pull in?
It did. And I
Wonderful.
started, and then it spun me off into a couple of other notes that I took, like getting into that, some of those data sources too, is just, teacher surveying and looking for emergent themes from maybe your school board minutes, what keeps coming up at school boards over and over and is or isn't being resolved, because that tends to be a community forum, only one, maybe even, teachers reflecting on parent inquiries, again, what comes up emergently as like a repetitive piece, like, is this, so, looking at things that you might have there from those different stakeholder groups, those communications that are just ongoing, or even like ongoing, what keeps coming up in your foyer as the kids are coming in, is it the length of the bus drive? I mean, if we're in rural districts, that can be impactful for a student. So thank you for that, generating thinking.
Yeah, and thank you for adding your additional thoughts there. I was just jotting down about kind of the big idea that I was hearing was around how other stakeholder groups are already communicating, and if there's ways then to gather that information based off of structures that are already in place. So awesome. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we want to kind of shift our question or our focus. So we started thinking about teams, and then we know when we got into the process itself, we start by building that data story. And so there is the question that Jennifer raised, and it kind of pairs a little bit with the one from Becky as well. So I'm thinking about if we can kind of frame it as a two-part question and then just see where it takes us. So Jennifer's question was specific around how do we build meaningful and confidential data stories with groups that are under 10, given that that's statistically invalid. So I think that's one piece of the puzzle, is thinking about when we have really small student groups, how do we make sure that that data remains confidential and is meaningful? And then similarly in the data bucket, how are small districts focusing on the whole child? So gathering data and then prioritizing goals. So I think we're kind of looking at big picture at our data stories, specific to what data are we collecting around whole child, and then also thinking about our really small districts and making sure that that data is meaningful given the number of students in an individual group. So I'm just going to open that up as kind of a broad question and see what y'all are thinking. I'm happy to get the conversation started. I also want to give a chance for those of you with the expertise around how you're doing this work in your districts and ISDs to share. So I can try and take a shot at maybe just some initial thoughts related to the smaller subgroup question that you had, Jennifer. So I know that in the work that the very limited work that I've done in using risk ratio data to support districts and schools, and thinking about how the practices within the school related to discipline might be impacting different groups of students in an inequitable way. One of the things that I often will share with groups is, yes, a group smaller than 10 is statistically less significant. That being said, if the data is indicating that those students have a need, it's kind of our responsibility as educators to dig into that a little bit further and better understand what's happening and why. So I think one celebration for districts that are very small with a lot of groupings that are under 10 is that hopefully, since it's a smaller number of students, you might have some time and space to dig a little more into what's going on and think about how what is present in your policies and your practices might be impacting those different groups of students, and it's going to be a little more personalized. The confidentiality piece, I think, is definitely tricky. So those were just my 2 cents. Lindsay, I see that you came off of the visual mute, so I wonder if you have some thoughts to add to that, or feel free to counter what I said too. I'm certainly not the expert.
No, not at all. Carrie Ann, I just actually was in with another district, and then I thought, ooh, small district roundtable. So I have 19 districts, and my smallest has 1 teacher and 1 student and is on an island, and I fly there. So I thought, oh, I might come in and see what's going on in here. So no, I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
I'm certainly not going to counter you, but I wanted to hear what you guys were talking about. My job today was to facilitate some small groups, and so I've been with districts, but I couldn't resist. So
awesome. Well, we're
yeah.
happy to have you, Lindsay. And Jennifer is up in the UP as well. And so she's been asking some questions about districts
Hi.
similar in size to the one that of yours that's on the island. And so the question we're tackling right now is kind of a 2-parter. We're thinking about the data story and the data sets that we're using. And so one question was, how do we build meaningful and confidential data stories for subgroups of students or even groups of students that are smaller than 10? So your example of
How do you pronounce? Yeah, I know the island. I've met with. I mean, it's been years, but yeah.
Yeah,
and we have a few island districts in the state, so that
I have more than 1. Yeah.
Yes, you've at least two.
I do.
Yeah. Yeah. So so going back, Carrie Ann, you talked about a risk ratio data analysis. I'm wondering if there's you could put a link in the chat to what that is. I'm just curious. That would be helpful as a resource. And then and again, that sparked not necessarily the data story, but in accounting to those stakeholder groups, knowing that you can't share student identifiable data, which is also that under 10 criteria for student identifiable data, maybe talking about having those processes that we say we're going to be implementing with integrity and being able to share that with our stakeholder groups, somehow, being accountable to our boards and our community that we are doing our professional, due diligence and being ethical in our practices and equitable in our practices, that maybe, focusing and discussing those things, maybe having input from the stakeholders as to what they would like to understand about how we meet the needs of each child and what are the aspects of those children that they really want us to, knowing that whole child risk model, having everybody buying into that.
Yeah, I think certainly that would be a way to approach it. So focusing on, if I'm capturing it correctly, focusing on more of the data related to adult behaviors in terms of the data that you would share with some of those broader stakeholder groups and get input on. Is that kind of what you were thinking, Jennifer?
I am thinking that, and I'm wondering other thoughts on that. And And Lindsay, I know I'm very curious on your thought on that because you're working with such similar demographics district wise as far as isolated rural. Yeah.
Yeah, we have quite a few. So, so we have been very successful, I think, in when we have a relationship between the board and the community and the teachers and the students articulated around something like a model. So like whole child would be an example. Some people are going with the SEL competencies and speaking through that lens. We definitely are communicating a definition of high quality instruction that's very specific to that setting. So when we go through and we do kind of causal theory pieces around curriculum, instruction, leadership, infrastructure, so that's all your policies and pieces like that, that data set that comes out. So like in my one room schoolhouse with one kiddo in it, sometimes there are two more that come on the island for their mom's work. So there are like 3 kids. And that has actually been a pretty robust MyKIP experience, because the teacher really needed to kind of troubleshoot for each of those individual children. She was new to the island, and she was having some, if you can believe it, difficulties with engagement and difficulties with the structure of the school related to family supports and things like that. And so we conducted, a decent kind of causal theory analysis situation. And then what we communicate out to the board and stakeholders is, like you said, you can't say this child and that child, but you can say, we committed to some project-based, place-based, and we committed to some non-academic supports that were allowing students to be more engaged in the academic pieces. And so we have like a list of things. My other island district, their MyKIP team is their administrator, 3 teachers, and 3 parents, and parents that have students in the school. And so that has been awesome. We asked the staff how they defined high quality instruction, and then we asked the parents how they defined high quality instruction. And then we aligned those and we matched them to their teacher evaluation framework. So everybody could speak the language. We have a thoughtful classroom. So everyone could speak the language together. And then we started to gather data. So we just gave a survey out to students that relates to what the teachers have defined as engaging instruction and whether or not the kids see evidence of that instruction in those classrooms. So it's a pretty courageous data journey in some ways, because we're really asking, it's different from asking kids if they feel safe and that type of thing. It's not a climate and culture survey. It's how do kids perceive high quality instruction in that setting, which is fabulous. So that survey went out a day ago. So that's how we're handling those. I don't have my smallest districts choosing a particular strategy, like a program type of a strategy at all. They're all focused on, all of my districts really have strategies like establishing a district level definition of high quality instruction and implementing that. Like we have these big. So that helps too, because then you're not trying to communicate the nitty gritty around just a few kids.
So it sounds like your strategies and your goals might be related more to the systems piece. Yes, no, did I hear that correctly?
Always. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yep. And that's really one thing that is part of that kind of MyKIP shift. We don't have a reading goal, we have a goal around high quality instruction or guaranteed and viable curriculum, or those types of things. And then within there, it's really important that everybody understands what that means before we try to implement any evidence-based practice. So it's it's been great. Tough. It is hard work. And not everybody's engaged. I have 19 districts and I have a few that we're still in conversation about kind of how to make that work. And then I have kind of middle of the road districts that are making a go of it and then doing some of the more traditional. And then I have a couple that are kind of like pushing forward with all the systems work and everywhere in between. So yeah, lots of learning.
I just wanted to comment on that too, is in regards to systems. My school district obviously is a little bit bigger, around 200 kids, but for us, what we focused in regards to the whole child was a collective responsibility and support systems. So those were 2 of our strategies that we worked on this year, and then we're going to build on that towards the end of this year on what we're going to look at, because when I planned it out initially, I only planned it out a year out, even though I knew it was going to be a multi-year goal. So that we're in the process right now of adding in our activities and that for the next year and the future for that.
Is it academic and non-academic systems for something like support?
Yeah, so what we did for our support system is we have a bunch of supports, but we didn't have like a set policy or anything that like showed like this is where it goes. So what I did is I developed a program or a policy that went through the academic and non-academics and listed not just all of our supports that we offer, but an actual like chart, like a flow map that you can see if they have this problem, they go to this and they can get to this individual that can provide this type of support. So that way, what we did is we integrated that into our researcher/student handbook this year. So that way parents now have this and now know what our supports that we offer and also able to follow a flow map of how to get their student the support that they need.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. So we've been talking about that first part of the question around the meaningful and confidential data stories, and kind of even bigger than that, how we're framing some of the work we're doing with our smaller districts. I want to make sure we tackle the question that Becky Stauffer added as well. So how are small districts focusing on the whole child, gathering data and then prioritizing goals? And Becky, if you want to give any more context to that question, feel free to unmute.
Well, sorry, my dog is coming.
All right, well, pause for the dog, and then Becky will come back to us.
Sorry, I apologize. He can't stand on the dogs for whatever reason, and one just went by the house. So you can tell how rural we are. I think my question was really around, and I think maybe you somewhat was answered it, right? Not really answered it, because I don't know if there's an answer, but James kind of hit on it, is that when we look at that whole child, we sometimes don't have data on all of it. And we don't always have resources on all of that in our small rural schools. You know, when you look at that health or that, you know, we're just limited on our resources in many of those areas too. So what I see a lot of schools, then we default to just academic goals because those are things that we somewhat have control of. But maybe there are things that we need to consider that are bigger, and that's where I kind of was asking. But I think maybe my thinking kind of shifted, and what James kind of said is looking at more of those systems level. And I think Lindsay, you mentioned it too. So it's if we're looking at more of those systems level, what things fall under high quality instruction, because an awful lot falls under high quality instruction, and maybe that's a stronger approach, or guaranteed viable curriculum, because then we can talk about access or appropriateness. So I appreciated the conversation. But if any other input people have, that would be great, because it's that diversity, and it's that resources, and really trying to, look at that whole child in that model, the WISC model, and trying to consider all of it, but not always having enough pockets in any of those areas. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I'm going to chime in, Becky, on how very much sense that makes, even though that sentence didn't make much sense. Like thinking about our professionals in our isolated rural districts who are wearing so many hats, and your principal is the superintendent, is teaching classes, is this guidance counselor, is all of these professional people that when we're talking about those whole child needs in the social emotional realm, there is no specialist in your back door. And how do our systems support these isolated rural families, and that access issue is, I feel, the equity issue that a lot of our families do struggle with. Transportation becomes that issue as far as access and equity. And I was in the diversity one earlier, just before, and I thought, just framing it around you're looking at your students and the whole child, are any of them having barriers? And that any barrier a child has is an equity issue in public education.
Thank you, Jennifer, for expanding on that. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in on the conversation, either with questions or thoughts about the access piece and equity?
I'll just say real quick, I have to go help another district, but I think that Becky, you're definitely onto something in your thinking around those big strategies. It gives you a lot of leeway then underneath there to do the things that need to be done for each child, combined with, like Jennifer, thinking about equity integrated into all those things. That's really what we want to see, right? I mean, you don't want an equity goal. You want, when we're thinking about high quality instruction, is this equitable? When we're working on guaranteed and viable curriculum, is this equitable? If you have an equity goal, those things be integrated, right? Like it's not a standalone. We have the strategies that we're using look like this, and they are seated in these bigger drivers. So like if your little district is focused on something like technical leadership, this touches these others, right? So if you picked high quality instruction and you were linking that to something like your organizational structure, I mean, you are so right. Like I have 5 superintendents who also drive a bus, right? Like this is a day-to-day thing. But we know that from a technical and adaptive leadership standpoint, we can get after a lot of this in the language. And so what we've done in part to help is to then break these out into some just common research-based activity sequences that people can at least look at so they have a place to start. Because I mean, there's no curriculum director, there's no way to, so how do I kind of organize myself in order to see those connections across? And equity is a good way to do that. So there are activity sequences that go under each of these. And so that has helped us at least have some language for what we might all talk about. Because I don't know about you guys, but like our superintendents all get together regularly, our principals all get together regularly, because we need to. We operate in a consortium. That's the only way we can really get things done. And so it helps that people have some of this unified language. The activity sheets then follow that. So like if you picked high quality instruction, it is not ever a one size fits all, right? Like never, no matter what size of district you have. But particularly in the small ones, there's some creativity that needs to happen to tailor. And so if we have that common foundation, then we can tailor all over the place and make sure that people get what they need.
Are those documents shareable, Lindsay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I'll fair warning, the activity sheets, the tendency with a group is to treat them like a checklist. They'll go down and they'll be like, oh yeah, we do that, check, check, check. Like it's not that. It's a conversation starter around how you might organize kind of your forward path. And then on the back side of that, there's an evaluation piece that like, you need to know what you really want. It's not about completing the boxes. So I'm just going to say that out loud to you guys before I share. But yeah, absolutely. I can put them in the chat.
Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing those resources before you jump back to your district. All right, I think we are in breakout rooms until 11:15. Is that correct? So there was one other question in the chat box that I want to make sure we have a chance to tackle. And it was about looking at tier 1 instruction and how that would connect to federal programs. And that comes from Brad. Brad, are you willing to unmute and just give a little more context around that?
Yeah. Brad Giesman from Hartford Public Schools. And so I've been listening to everybody's information, and with the diverse group in here, I think it kind of helps out with that. A lot of us wear multiple hats in the district. And so I do our federal programs with curriculum, and I couldn't even name what else. So one challenge that we've been having is realizing that guaranteed and viable curriculum. So that tier 1 instruction piece is really something that we're focused on. And then what Becky said, how you bring in the whole child, because it's easy just to focus on academics. So, we were doing some work on that as well. But as the federal grants person, and we have a decent amount of Title I, Title I-C, Title II, and all those great things. And then you have at risk, which obviously doesn't have to be tied into Nexus, but still has a process of how that is being tied into our district plan. I'm just trying to wrap my head around if we have to attach with the goals and the strategies that we make in MyKIP to our federal programs. What I don't want to do is lose sight of what we've always done in the past of, well, we do this, and this with our federal programs. And so we have to make sure we write that into MyKIP, with the school improvement process, because of, we have to show that's part of our process in order to get those funds. And so trying to eliminate that out and causing a burden for me is, okay, we're going to work on the social and emotional aspect of our district and then the guaranteed viable curriculum. Now, how do we start building in? I don't want to do strategies just to have them, because now we're going to have too many. But how do I tag, our staffing that we use, or if we do purchase any programs for our migrant students, or just our students in general, with our funds, to keep the process true to what it's been intended for, and not go off of making things just to meet the needs of our federal programs funding. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Brad. And I see someone in the chat box agrees with you. And I also see some nodding heads. So I am going to push on the group. State and federal programs is something that's very new to me. So I don't have a lot of experience and expertise. But I'm sure there are many of you on this call that do. So if anyone has any thoughts to share with Brad about how to tackle some of this related to the use of those funds, that would be super helpful.
One of the things that I would suggest is not focusing it in necessarily as a strategy, but as an activity, because as long as it's in there in some place, because like, for example, what I've done, again, going back to when I was looking at my support network, that was one of my strategies, I put in some of these title programs as activities, was hiring those positions. So that way it's still covered, it's in there as part of the support network, and not having to create a whole new strategy around that specific position. So maybe trying to find how do they integrate with your strategies you have, and then putting them in as an activity underneath that strategy.
I also see in the chat box, have already had to go back and add to our MyKIP plan to get approval for a new activity we wanted to use being paid for out of Title I funds. So Brad, does that help? Do others have thoughts?
Yeah, it does. And that's, like I said, that's where that complexity is, because of when we last met as a district group, we were talking about that curriculum piece, but I notified them of when we were doing our fish, when we dive deeper, we can't just jump into the curriculum side of it if we don't have the infrastructure side of it, and the system in place, because we don't have time set aside to do the work. We don't have the ability to have substitutes like we used to back in the day. So if we don't build a structure or an infrastructure of making it a priority, then it's not going to be successful in any of the work that we do. So I think James, thank you for sharing that. And I'm just trying to wrap my brain around when we look at that guaranteed and viable curriculum and the infrastructure piece. How do we branch that off? Which might be like support, services for all of our students. It's a challenge. Time is a challenge that I know everyone in this room could say is something that we struggle with. So thank you for the guidance and help.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And Barb added to the chat as well that that her district has a MTSS strategy, and that the Title I activities are linked to that strategy. I'm also wondering, just to kind of expand on the piece around the activities. So I don't know if this is getting at what you were asking, Brad, but and if there are activities beyond this, but when I think about the activities that might fall under guaranteed and viable curriculum related to some of what you were mentioning, so one of the roles, primary roles of a district in terms of the infrastructure and systems piece is to ensure that you have staff that are trained, you have access to coaching. So any of those type of activities, I would think could fall underneath the larger strategy of guaranteed and viable curriculum, because they're all necessary in order to be able to deliver that curriculum as intended. But I don't know if that gets at what you were talking about with the funding piece.
Yeah, it's just in district our size and high poverty and diversity that we have, we get a decent amount of at-risk and title funds. And so we're not talking about a little bit, we're talking about a significant amount, like 25 staff members in our district are paid through these funds. And so it's a process when you're dealing with, you know, over $1 million, almost $2 million in all federal and state grants. It's a process. So just thank you.
Yep. Other thoughts around any of the questions we've tackled so far? And if you have an additional question, feel free to add it. I think we have about 15 minutes left for this group. Sorry, I'm eating my apple. I'll just give everyone a second to think if there's anything that you would like to talk about. And then I have a couple questions that we have not tackled that we could discuss if people want to go in that direction. So this is pretty broad. I'm wondering if this might be a question that resonates with some of you. What are some of the successes and barriers that you've encountered related to specifically the district level approach to continuous improvement? So we've talked quite a bit about some of the impacts of being from a smaller district. And one thing that I've just been wondering and grappling with and would love to hear from all of you is just when you have those smaller districts, how do you have you had any successes or barriers in getting people to shift their thinking from a school level approach to a district level approach?
So I would say my experience would be no, because the school is the district level. And I go back to the day when I was a principal teacher in a building that had anywhere from 8 to 14 students, which was also the district with anywhere from 8 to 14 students, having to fill out a district level plan and a school level plan in order to get my state and federal programs. And so that has been the sun shining on my world, that my KIP actually might be a better fit, because the school is the district is the school, and it's a one-stop shop.
I can appreciate that. There's the silver lining of being so small, or one of them anyway.
You know, I would say though, kind of on the flip side of that, I see schools, especially one of the schools that I work with, because this is a district model, it's not real clear yet where they fit. You know, like they're adding all the data, they're adding, contributing to those data stories. And then activities are assigned, but it kind of falls into exactly what Brad was saying. It's a district that gets a lot of funding from a lot of those different pieces. And so then we're still grappling with, where does that school team fit? What is that school's responsibility? And how, we've kind of played around with some monitoring pieces and implementation that has gone well in some areas, in one area. But I would say there's still some confusion around what's that building responsibility.
Thank you, Becky.
I kind of wanted to chime in about that too, being a single building district and being a cyber school. It's very interesting and has its own challenges. But what we've done for our approach is that we focus more so at the building level for the most part, and then the superintendent and our district office will come in to do the piece, and then we have a review like at the end of the year to make sure that we're meeting all of the needs. Because with us, we do have other schools in our network that we are working with. And I'm also the district data coach for those other buildings. And so I've been meeting with those directors at these other buildings and making sure that we have a coordinated approach to this.
Thank you, James, for sharing your experience and making some connections to a little bit of a different model, being that you're representing a virtual school. I appreciate that connection that was made around helping schools figure out where they fit in the process. I think that's something that personally I've been trying to think through how best to support and communicate that with the districts that I support. And for sure that right now the lens has been the school's role in implementation, fidelity, and monitoring. But I do think that that's a shift in thinking, and sometimes it's a challenge. Any thoughts from others about the district approach? All right, I have another question for you. So it's been brought up that many of you wear multiple hats, and time is a difficult commodity to come across. So I'm wondering if any of you have ideas or thoughts on how you are continuing to prioritize the continuous improvement work, given all the different roles that you serve and the priorities of your district and the limited time. Has anyone come up with any creative ways to make space for that?
Well, I'm not gonna say that this is creative by any way, shape, or form, but we're to get people and we're busy and so we have to do most of this work after school, at least right now. So we're obviously paying a stipend to those staff members that are willing to do it. But right now I'm currently working on a new calendar, which helps with that infrastructure piece. Building those pieces throughout the year to provide time for teachers to collaborate and do some of the work that we want to do moving forward. So kind of getting out of our comfort zone of what we've always done of a traditional calendar and providing more half days set in every couple of weeks to really show that we're intentional and we're really driven behind wanting to make this a priority in the work that we're going to do. So it might not directly be time set aside just for the MyKit process, but I think it ties into the MyKit of what we're finding we need to do in the district. If we don't provide that time for the staff to have that work time in improving our instruction, then it's not going to happen. We can't keep expecting it to happen, after hours, or in the summer. So just being deliberate with our calendar and using all the resources that the state's allowing us to make it a calendar that's purposeful for our staff.
Thank you, Brad, for sharing. I'm definitely seeing more districts trying to find ways to embed the use of the data to drive instruction within their calendars to honor that, like you said, after school time and time during the summer. as best as they can, right? Like you're always, there's always parameters, but other thoughts on how you might be working to prioritize continuous improvement?
One of the systems that I did helped create this year is we made a more formal process to be a committee-driven school. So even though you have your principal for my district is me, but I like to run everything through committees. So you have at least 2 or 3 people looking at it. So we made a more formal committee process for multiple different things, from enrollment, administration, staff appreciation, student appreciation, and then made this a more formal process, and then providing a time frame of when they're supposed to be having these meetings and how often these meetings should be happening. So that way that it's a more formal structure. The biggest piece is having that written process, I believe, and that's I've now been the director for my building for 3 years, and I'm still going back and revising procedures, policies, and that. And I actually just went back over the last month or so, and we revised my 5-year plan with my staff on where we wanted to be at the end of my 5th year, because it's just, as we continue to grow and see these new things, especially with the curveball the pandemic brought to us, it really, you want to be able to have something, a structure in place to know that that time is set aside for you to do everything that needs to be done, not just from a compliance piece, but so that way, you're dedicated during that time to that conversation.
Thank you, James. Having that dedicated time and space is really important. And I love that you're working to make sure that there is time for all of the things and communication around what the expectations are as well. So we have just a couple minutes left. I'm wondering, just to kind of wrap us up, if everybody wants to take a second, think about one takeaway, one thing that will inform what you're doing in your district moving forward, whether it was a success you heard, a strategy that you'd like to apply, something specific to how things are being structured within my KIP, whatever that little nugget of learning was for you. And once you have that, if you want to throw it in the chat box, we'll just kind of see what everybody took away from our session today. I love it. Things do not have to be overly complicated. Work with what you have. Systems and collective responsibility. It's great to get together to learn from others and from their successes and challenges, using time after school in the summer to meet, and create activities will make everyone part of the process. Good to listen to others. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, as you're adding, hi, Barb, nice to see you too. As you're adding those thoughts, once you've got what you want to contribute, feel free to join the main room, and we'll see you in about 30 seconds.